My name is Samira, and I'm 24 years old. I used to believe that the happiest day of my life would be my wedding day, the moment when everything I had dreamed about would finally come true. But a week before my wedding, something happened that turned my world upside down. I later discovered that my mom had canceled every wedding vendor. Behind my back. The flowers, the catering, even the venue. At first, I had no idea. Everything seemed normal on the surface. I was living in that dreamy bubble. Every bride knows. The one filled with color palettes, seating charts, dress fittings, and late-night calls with my fiancé Amir about the future we were about to start together. We had been planning the wedding for almost a year. 200 guests were invited. The venue was a beautiful garden lot outside, the city with tall white arches and rows of cherry blossom trees that would be in full bloom the week of our ceremony. The florist had promised soft pink arrangements everywhere. The caterer had designed a menu my dad used to love before he passed away, and every small detail felt personal. My mom had been involved in the planning from the very beginning, which I thought was sweet. She insisted on helping with phone calls, appointments, and payments, saying she wanted to make sure her only daughter had a perfect wedding. Looking back now, that's exactly how she gained control of everything. About 10 days before the wedding, small, strange things started happening. My florist stopped replying to my messages. The catering manager suddenly said he needed to confirm something later. And when I called the venue coordinator, she sounded oddly hesitant, like she was trying to avoid saying something directly. At the time, I thought it was just normal wedding chaos. Amir told me not to stress, that vendors sometimes get overwhelmed during wedding season. I wanted to believe him. But 3 days later, while I was finalizing the seating chart at home, my maid of honor Lena walked in looking pale. She had her laptop open and said quietly, "Samira, I think something is wrong." My stomach dropped before she even finished her sentence. She turned the screen toward me, showing an email chain between the venue, coordinator, and someone using my mother's name. The message said the wedding had been canceled by the bride's family and all services were no longer required. I remember laughing at first because it sounded ridiculous. My mom wouldn't do something like that. She had been the one pushing me to make the wedding bigger, inviting distant relatives, telling everyone how proud she was. But Lena kept scrolling. More emails appeared. The florist confirming cancellation. The catering company acknowledging termination of contract. Each message ended with the same polite line, as requested by the bride's mother. I felt like the floor had disappeared under my feet. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called my mom immediately. When she answered, she sounded calm, almost cheerful. I asked her directly if she had canceled anything related to my wedding. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that feels louder than words. Then she sighed and said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. She told me she had done it because she was saving me from ruining my future. Confused and hurt, I demanded she explain what she meant. That's when she admitted something even worse. She said she had spoken privately to Amir a few days earlier and told him, "My daughter is damaged goods, and you're making the biggest mistake of your life." Hearing those words felt like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. My own mother had said that about me. I didn't even understand why. She wouldn't explain properly, only repeating that she was trying to stop the marriage before it was too late. I hung up the phone feeling numb, like my brain couldn't process what had just happened. The next morning, I started calling every vendor myself, hoping there had been some misunderstanding. But one by one, they confirmed the same thing. The wedding had been canceled nearly a week earlier. Deposits were gone. Bookings had been released. My carefully planned celebration had vanished in a series of quiet phone calls I never knew about. I imagined the nightmare scenario that was coming closer by the minute. 200 guests arriving on our wedding day, and finding nothing but an empty lot. I thought everything was over. I thought my mother had destroyed the most important day of my life. What I didn't realize yet was that someone else had already discovered what she had done, and that person had been secretly preparing something for 6 months. For the rest of that night, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by wedding binders, contracts, and decorations that suddenly felt meaningless. Every plan I had spent months building was gone. With a few phone calls my own mother had made behind my back. The venue was canceled. The flowers were gone. The caterer had already given my date to another event. I kept thinking about the same terrifying image. 200 guests arriving on our wedding day, and finding nothing but an empty lot. The humiliation alone made my chest tighten. I imagined whispers spreading through the crowd. relatives asking questions, Amir's family wondering what kind of chaos they were marrying into. And the worst part was the reason behind it all. My own mother telling my fiancé that, "My daughter is damaged goods, and you're making the biggest mistake of your life." Those words echoed in my head like a cruel recording I couldn't turn off. Amir came over that night after finishing work. I expected him to look unsure, maybe even distant after what my mother had said to him. Instead, he walked straight into the apartment, sat next to me, and pulled me into a tight hug before I could even speak. I asked him what exactly my mom had told him when she called. He looked uncomfortable, but honest. She had told him personal things from my past, twisting them into something ugly, insisting that marrying me would ruin his future. Amir said he listened quietly and then told her something simple. That he was marrying me because he loved me, not because he expected perfection. Hearing that made my eyes fill with tears for the first time that day. But love alone couldn't magically bring back a canceled wedding. Everything seemed ruined. I told him maybe we should postpone everything, give ourselves time to figure it out. That's when Lena, my maid of honor, cleared her throat in the corner of the room with a strange smile on her face. She had been quiet for most of the evening, watching us both carefully. Then she said something that completely confused me. She reminded me of something written in that ridiculous thumbnail, headline people would later see online. But my maid of honor had been planning something for 6 months. I stared at her, completely lost. 6 months? Planning what? She closed her laptop slowly and said she had suspected something, like this might happen long before the cancellations. My mom had always been controlling, always trying to shape my life the way she wanted it. Lena told me that during the early wedding planning stages, she noticed how aggressively my mom tried to control vendors and finances. Something about it made her uneasy. So quietly, without telling anyone, not even me, she started building a backup plan. At first I thought she was joking, but she began explaining piece by piece. She had secured a small private vineyard outside the city months ago, under her own name. It wasn't the giant garden venue I had booked, but it was beautiful and intimate. She had also stayed in contact with a second catering company that had a free schedule that weekend. A photographer friend owed her a favor. Even the decorations could be replaced with simple lights and flowers from a local supplier. My brain struggled to process what she was saying. I asked her why she would do something like that without telling me. She shrugged and said she didn't want to worry me unless the worst actually happened. And now it had. For the next 2 days, we moved like a team of people planning a secret mission. Calls were made, deliveries arranged. Amir's family stepped in to help immediately. My cousins volunteered to decorate the vineyard themselves. The guest list was quietly redirected with new location, details sent through messages and emails. The more we worked, the more I started to feel something strange replacing the earlier despair, hope. My mother believed she had destroyed the wedding completely. She had no idea that another one was quietly being rebuilt somewhere else. Finally, the day arrived. The original venue, the empty lot my mother had canceled, stayed exactly as it was. Silent and unused. But across town, at the vineyard Lena had secured months earlier, fairy lights glowed between rows of grapevines, long wooden. Tables were covered with soft white cloth, and music floated through the warm evening air. One by one, our 200 guests arrived, not to an empty disaster, but to a place that somehow felt even more magical than the original plan. And then something happened that none of us expected. My mom showed up. Apparently she had heard from a relative that the wedding was still happening somewhere. She walked into the vineyard looking confident at first, probably expecting chaos or embarrassment. Instead, she stepped into a glowing celebration filled with laughter, music, and people cheering as Amir and I stood together under a simple wooden arch. I will never forget the look on her face. Shock, confusion, silence. She had spent a week destroying everything behind my back, believing she had stopped the wedding completely. But instead, she walked straight into a full celebration she didn't control and couldn't stop. She never anticipated what she walked into. In that moment, I realized something important. The people who truly loved me had built something stronger than her sabotage. The ceremony went on, vows were spoken, and when the crowd erupted into applause, my mother stood there speechless, surrounded by proof that her plan had failed. That night, as Amir and I shared our first dance under the vineyard lights, I understood that family isn't defined by who tries to control your life. It's defined by who stands beside you when everything falls apart.